Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Today I'm speaking with Maya Hemachandra about the state of nonprofits. Maya, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we had a really long conversation in the green room before we clicked on the record button. And I want to we had one topic in mind for our listeners today, and we totally made a left turn because this new topic that we will talk about today is a lot more interesting, a lot more pertinent, a lot more vital, I think, than the one we had in mind. So this is a fully organic conversation, which is awesome. But just want to let the listeners know, and it's really about tough choices because we are October now, 2025. Nonprofits are in a bad shape overall. Like they're not really doing that well financially and motivation wise and existentially wise even as well. But before we get to all of that, maybe we can start with your superhero origin story. How did you get started working with nonprofits?
I'm sure this is a common superhero origin story, and that's AmeriCorps. That I was originally going to be a geneticist, and I did research in fly labs for 5 years. I picked my college based on who would let me do research as an undergrad. And about halfway through, I realized that spending all this time in the lab, just myself and fruit flies, was really painfully lonely. And even the other researchers, I try and strike up a conversation, and that's not a talkative group. They just kind of look at me. And so I graduated and knew that I was not going to have this career in the lab that I had envisioned for myself. And I came home and didn't know what to do with myself and kind of stumbled into an AmeriCorps role at the Seattle Public Library, and really just fell in love with the work, right? I think AmeriCorps is I joke that it's like the gateway drug for nonprofit employees because, up to that point, it never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that this was a viable career path to be in my community, supporting people who had less access to resources than I did. And, over 25 years later, it's been a really meaningful ride. And so I'm really grateful to that. And I'm really sad that AmeriCorps is kind of on the chopping block all over our country because those are vital resources for nonprofits that depend on them. And it's, once again, the way that so many young people who get the support and the training and the start that they need to live meaningful careers in service to our country.
Yeah. So let's start getting into that then. Let's paint a landscape of how you see the world today, or at least the U.S. And Canada as well too. Yeah, at the state level and federal level. What are we looking at in terms of the landscape over the last couple of months and maybe for the next few months?
Yeah, so it's very related to the AmeriCorps comment. So I am a professional interim. So that means that I go into organizations who are in moments of transition, and I work with them either as an executive, CEO, president, executive director, or as a development director. My majority of my background is in fundraising. And for the last year, there have been a lot of these questions that are coming up of like, is this organization still viable? And that was already happening because you had this huge influx of federal money into the nonprofit system during the pandemic. And then it was kind of last year or the year before that money started drying up. And so organizations that had grown, that had created new programs, that had really increased their complexity based on those dollars. One of the organizations I was with was getting $50 million a year in pass-through money that was going out to the community. And so, yes, most of that money was going out, but they had to hire additional staff. They had to hire additional finance people to keep up with those reporting requirements. And looking at it and saying, hey, you're a $100 million agency, but 50 million of that is going away, right? You need to start thinking of what you're going to be as a $50 million organization. So that conversation was already happening of just the natural ending of the additional pandemic dollars. And then what we have seen this year is, between the DOGE and federal government mandates, is we're seeing incredible cuts to nonprofit contracts of all sizes and shapes. And organizations across the country are having this moment of saying, oh my gosh, like this money that this AmeriCorps grant we've had for 30 years. One org I was with, AmeriCorps grant for 30 years, their whole program built around it. They got an email on a Friday night that said, it's over mid-contract, right? Not end of the contract. They had already hired these AmeriCorps folks. They had relocated. They had been trained. They were out in the field. And they said, okay, as of today, they no longer have a job. You no longer are getting this money.
Wow.
So we have been doing contingency planning on what if it's not renewed, but it had never occurred to us at that point, and that was in April, to say, well, what if it just gets yanked overnight because it doesn't no longer aligns with the priorities of the administration. I mentioned to you, I'm in the middle of college search with my kiddo, and I have a number of fundraising friends who work at local universities. And it's throwing the whole university system into disarray because there has been so much money in research grants that is being pulled. And so universities who had relied on that as a major source of revenue and a way to pay their tenured staff are having to do this calculus of, is it time to merge? Is it time to close? Do we raise tuition? Do we accept more students? How do we fill this gap? So everybody's in this place where it feels like the ground shifted underneath us and we're not where we were before. And we're having to make really tough decisions about how organizations can or should go forward.
All right. Well, let's start here because there's a few threads that I can pull. You gave a couple of examples. I was wondering if you could give maybe a few more examples of how operations are being impacted. So, I mean, I can't imagine like a 30-year contract being canceled mid-contract. That's really hard to plan for. You know, what are we looking, or what do you normally see as an outcome of that? Like, besides, is it just mass firings, like instant layovers? Like that must cause so much concern and panic. But what does that mean at the ground?
Well, so I don't think people realize how much of nonprofit work is paid for and supported by government contracts. And that's federal, that's state, that's county, city, municipality. That for decades, really, the nonprofits have become the workshops where the work of the government gets done. So they might say, hey, we're going to increase the amount of food that goes out into the community. Well, the government's not going to do that. They're going to hire nonprofits to go and do that. And so, first of all, those contracts rarely pay for the full cost. So that's where philanthropy comes in, and we've been relying on that. But the number of donors has been going down for 20, 25, 30 years at this point, right? I did my dissertation for my master's degree on this in 2008, and the trend has just accelerated. So when these things pull back, right, what that looks like is nonprofits who were already maybe a bit precarious, right? We already run lean. It's already frowned on to have really large reserves or investments. So when that gets cut, you're left in a place of saying, well, either we have to pull out, if we have reserves, we have to raise more, or we have to actually close. So an organization I'm working with right now just announced this last week that we are closing an early learning center that has been in operation for over 30 years, that has been serving young people, children, who are in families who are at risk of homelessness, right? Providing stability and working with those families, not just to help the children, but to help the families access resources. And it is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking to the families that we've been trying to help place them in other organizations who still have this program available. And the families keep coming back and saying, well, has something changed? I don't want to leave. And so I think there's a real human cost, both in the number of employees, because we had to lay off all of our early learning staff. But there's also a cost to the people who were here to make a difference for, as those resources, which were already never enough, reduce further.
So you mentioned merging, closing. I mean, these are, end of life type of stuff. Is there anything you can mention on, and I'm sure it's case by case, of course, but when typically should a nonprofit consider should merge with another, or when should they,
No.
consider closing with another? Like, there are certain factors that say, if you have this, this, and this, you might want to consider merging. If you've got that, that, and that, you might want to consider closing.
First, I want to just acknowledge that for so many nonprofits, right, we have been taught to say we are the only, we are the best, right? It's in every grant application, it's in every philanthropy ask. Like when your dollars come here, we're going to use it the best. And that makes it hard sometimes to pivot and say, oh, actually, maybe we need to do things in partnership. The second thing I want to acknowledge is like for startups, their goal is to be acquired, right? In business, mergers and acquisitions aren't seen as this bad, scary thing. In nonprofits, it makes boards and staff feel like somehow they have failed. And
Mm.
so, what I have seen and what I've heard anecdotally is a lot of nonprofits don't consider these options until it's too late, until they can't make the next payroll. So I think I've been part of a number of conversations around these of like, can we move a program? And I've seen that happen. Can we do a full merger? And there's a lot in between. So there's actually a continuum that exists from can we partner to provide services in a more efficient, more effective, more cost efficient way to a full merger or acquisition where full merger is two organizations becoming a new organization, but usually it doesn't look like that, right? There's also what business calls acquisition. A great interim I'm working with is like, we need a different word for that in nonprofits. That sounds too mean and too harsh, but something about like coming together or absorption or right where one organization gets folded into another so that some of those services are still making it to the community, but in a way where you have savings on the administrative roles. And it costs money and it takes time to have those discussions, right? That I've heard they can be done very quickly if you're really under the gun, but to get that best fit, to find another organization that aligns with your values and has a similar culture, and to find, is it about putting your program, say our early learning center with another early learning center, or is it about an offer to, let's say, a housing organization that doesn't have that and would really love to add it to their portfolio? So it can take time to have those conversations and get there. I've also been part of a merger that was in process and then fell apart. So back to the don't wait too late, recognize that sometimes you can start down this path and there's going to be, it's like a relationship. You might think you're going somewhere and you get to a point and you're like, you know what, actually, this isn't a fit and we're going to go our separate ways. But if you're at the point where you're already like not being able to pay payroll, that's a really tough place to be.
I was pulling up my thesaurus as we were talking because I agree, mergers, acquisition sounds very scary, and a lot of businesses, they want to be acquired. They actually sometimes start with the intention of being acquired by someone bigger. So my thesaurus pulled out stuff like collaboration, unification.
Ooh, unification. I like that.
I like unification actually. That maybe we'll stick with that one. That one's an interesting one. Mission alignment, joining forces. But I think unification is a pretty good one. Yeah. So in the for-profit world, these are not scary words, and this way, maybe nonprofits can take a page from their notebook and see it as this is a way of moving forward, of continuing to help the community without losing yourself entirely. And closing, I mean, no one wants to close. On a more optimistic route, I mean, this situation, the conditions will hopefully build certain resilience in certain organizations as well. People who are better prepared for it, who have taken measures, like you said, contingency plans. Even though fundraising numbers are down, the number of donors are down, we know that the amounts are going up a little bit. Like, is there other forms of revenue? You mentioned earlier, I'm not sure it was on or before we started clicking that record button, but GoFundMe type of scenarios where people are asking others to help in that kind of scenario, more peer to peer. Like, are there other forms of revenue that you've suggested, explored, or heard of that nonprofits can start looking into to give that sort of resilience so that they can make up for that lost funds that came from the government?
Organizations that so I'll go back to the organization I was with that had the AmeriCorps contract lost. They are actually well poised to continue. They are having to shift and change, but they have an earned revenue program where they receive payments for work that they provide. that helps create that base of revenue. So it's not entirely dependent on either government or donor dollars. And I liked what you said about becoming more resilient and using the opportunity. Never waste a good crisis. So I was with a United Way during the downturn in 2008. Really fun time to be fundraising, let me tell you. And our president at the time would tell people, well, we stayed flat and flat is the new up, right? Like they were really proud that we managed to at least like maintain everything we were doing. At the same time, there were United Ways that lost 80 to 90% of their revenue, right? And we're having to back then go through this, do we close, do we merge, or do we become something different? And in that moment, we felt like we got the better end of the deal. And then fast forward 5 years, and when you were at the conferences, the organizations who were doing the most innovative, groundbreaking, impactful work were those ones who had, like Detroit, right? So the automakers had shut a bunch of things, there was high unemployment. And the Detroit United Way had really had this moment where they said, well, everything's out the window. Who do we want to be today? And they had come up with incredible community focused. They were doing like urban farming in vacant lots to make sure people had food. And so I think there is the silver lining in this is that, okay, the system as it is doesn't work. I had a friend who would be like, good, we know that now. What can we build instead? And so back to the topic of mergers, acquisitions, partnerships, right? If this isn't working for us all to have these old standalone organizations, well, good. What can we build that's more collaborative, is more community based, and really leans into the truth that no one organization can solve these big societal issues, right? No one organization is going to solve homelessness. No one organization is going to ensure that everyone is fed. And so how do we really rethink how we as a nonprofit network work together with our, what has often been termed your competition or your frenemies, right? Like, how do we put that aside and say, if our real goal is to make sure that the community is served, how does that change our work? Not just making sure that our organization is healthy and thriving and growing, but that the community is healthy and thriving and growing.
I mean, I have my own business, right? And I usually have more than one client. It was instilled upon me when I was starting it off that it's never a good idea to have one, what they call whale client, the one that provides more than even 50% or 80% of your revenue, because it's great while that client is there, but the moment they leave, that's a huge loss to revenue. And you can take, obviously you do have plans and contingencies to mitigate that, but the idea is that much better for resilience to diversify your streams of income. So if one comes or one goes, you can adapt more easily. This is the silver lining I'm hoping that nonprofits today will be able to find, at least the majority of them. I know that there's always going to be some that won't, but the ones that do will hopefully be in a better place to say, okay, you're right, this is now the new normal. We can't depend on the way we did things before. Let's start with a clean slate, look at every or all options or all reasonable options at least, and figure out how do we move forward to sustain ourselves, maybe a bit leaner, maybe a bit differently than we first expected or planned to, but this is the reality we have to adjust to. And I think that kind of mindset of saying that, the positive, the growth, the abundance mindset, keeping those to carry you forward and finding different ways to keep going. Hey, Alex here. I want to take a brief moment and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, please consider sharing it with someone who would also benefit from its insights. It's these kinds of referrals that really help the show grow. You can also show your support by making a small donation. I don't do corporate sponsorships or product placements, so I rely on your support to keep the show going. You can visit my website, agentsofnonprofit.com, and click Support Us in the top menu. Thank you kindly.
The other things I would say is part of what I've had to do in every one of the clients I've come to as an interim is look at our systems, right? So we luckily live in a world where technology has advanced so far so quickly. And yes, every nonprofit is behind technologically, has this technology debt, but there are places when we're saying, okay, we have to reduce the number of staff. How can we do this stuff more efficiently? I have a whole theory that at a point when an organization reaches maturity, it, all these policies get set and the way that we do things get set, and then it kind of crystallizes. And so some of these organizations that reached maturity 20, 30, 40, 50, 80 years ago are still doing things in ways that are not very efficient, effective. And so really thinking about how do you make sure that the systems you have are talking to each other? How do you make sure that it's really easy to get a reimbursement, right? You can use some of these tools like Divvy or Ramp, right? That don't require you to handwrite and staple your receipt and turn it into a basket and hope that it gets processed within a month, right? So I think that that's one of the things nonprofits can do as well is lean into that, really saying, okay, so if we need to be leaner and more effective, what tools can help us get there? The other thing I'm really gonna encourage nonprofits to do as you move into community, as you think about how you can collaborate, one of the places we need to talk about and need to show up more in is advocacy, right? And there are two types of advocacy that I talk about when I talk about this. And the first is the advocating for funding for your own organization. But I'm also talking about how are we advocating with and for the communities that we serve? When these cuts happen, instead of saying well, I need this money back, how are we showing up and saying, here is the impact to real people of these cuts. Here is the harm that is being done. And here is what that looks like. We've done storytelling to our donors, but we often forget, once again, coming back to the government, there have been good examples where policies were moving through or things were cut. That organization that got that AmeriCorps grant cut worked in advocacy and in partnership with all the other groups receiving AmeriCorps funding in the state of Washington and with our state attorney general, and were able to file an injunction and get that money back. Now, will it be renewed? Probably not. But, that there is power in that. And I think a lot of nonprofits have really shied away from moving into advocacy, from asking our donors and our partners in our community to come with us in advocacy. And I think that that's something that we need to do more and more in this moment where there's so much flux happening.
Yeah, I totally agree. Advocacy is fantastic. People have a voice that's louder than they think it is. And sometimes it takes more than one voice for to be heard, but we do have that power. On the technology side, because I'm obviously a tech guy, I live for efficiency and effectiveness. So to hear an organization that's been, as you said, crystallized, which I get it. If it's not broke, don't fix it kind of mentality. But I see a lot of organizations when I come in to help them with, in this case, mostly for Salesforce. I see all kinds of inefficiencies and so many manual workarounds, and like it is. I do believe in some regards, technology can really make a big difference on that because it can eliminate a lot of human intervention that's really unnecessary. That doesn't really add any really value anyway. Most tech in general is a side effect. The mission is to help homelessness or to help food shelters or this, that. It's not to spend your time in front of a computer typing in what needs to be done. It's actually doing the work. So to me, tech should be light and lean. It should be a tool that you barely notice. It's just something that happens and amplifies what you're doing and really doesn't get in the way. And there are just, unfortunately, too many organizations where it is in the way. So this is a fantastic moment to say, how can we make our systems work better for us, talk more, so we don't need to be involved in this day-to-day administrative stuff.
Absolutely. Once again, my background's really in fundraising. And when I come in, I often look at the database. And historically, I remember when back in the day, United Way, there were we had this purpose-built United Way database. So we had 2 people who were just keeping it up and running and pulling the reports because we couldn't do that. And there are so many more options now, and options at all different price points, right? For a lot of fundraisers, it used to be if you were a big shop, you had Razor's Edge. And if you were a little shop, you had an Excel spreadsheet, right? And now there are really great tools like Give Butter and Little Greenlight that are so inexpensive. Um, and the truth is, for some of these big ones, the big Salesforce databases, the big Razor's Edge databases, I was just working with one org that had this beautifully purpose-built Salesforce database, and nobody had been putting data in for almost 3 years, right? Like if you're not using the tool, then it's the wrong tool, right? If you can't be bothered, then you need to have a conversation about like back to the database shouldn't exist for itself, but if the board chair is asking me who needs to be called at year end to renew their gifts and I have no idea, that's a problem. So I really think I don't want to make light of the fact that a database transition is a lot of work and takes time. And at the same time, like sometimes it is worth it to put that work in to have the better product. And nonprofits are notoriously bad at that. Because we always feel like we're at our maximum, that sometimes it can be really like impossible to do one more thing. We kind of had some questions prepared around AI, and I will say I've been a little skeptical of AI in the space in part because no one has really shown me yet like how to make some of these things easier while still maintaining donor confidentiality, while still maintaining the confidentiality of the individuals that we work with. But that's not to say that it doesn't exist. It's just that right now everybody's like, oh, just put it in AI. And I'm like, once again, you have to assume that nonprofits are not in a space where A, they may not even have a operating system that's still supported. B, their laptops, if they have laptops, are probably donated and old. So it's like, how do you make this easier and more purpose-built and help lead the way for us to get there? Because most nonprofits don't have that time to sit there and go, well, what if, right? And so, I mean, you said you work in this. What have you seen that's worked with nonprofits to help move them into this new AI future?
Yeah, there's 2 points before I get to AI. The first one was though is, and I've seen this also time and time again. They're not a lot of profits are really, I mean, they're on the ground, they're running, and they're running so fast they don't have a chance to even look around to see where they are, to see maybe there's a sports car right next to them that they can get into, and it'll get them that much faster, that much further. I mean, the concept being is that, yeah, if your systems are working for you and you know how to use them, but they're terribly inefficient, sometimes it's difficult to, you're right, take a pause and say, how can we improve these things and realize that there might be a better way. And it's worth an initial investment to get to that better way, because after that, you'll have so much more time. I mean, there is a measurable return on investment with most tech. And it's about understanding that and realizing, hey, wait a minute, if we invest a little bit of our time and energy and money into building this new thing, we can save ourselves, countless hours after it's up and running. So that's one. And then two, AI. I mean, yes, I try keeping my eye and ear. Well, I was going to say eye to the ground, but ear to the ground in terms of AI and nonprofits. The good news is, there was a nonprofit summary report that was recently announced. It was actually run by Salesforce themselves, but they don't put their name too much on it. But the idea is that last year, I'm going to hopefully get these numbers right, something like 15% of nonprofits were looking at or using AI, and that number has jumped to like 55% of all the numbers that they pulled. So there's definitely in the past year a wave of nonprofits that are realizing, hey, wait a minute, maybe AI can really help us, in exploring how it can. So it's either people who are now starting to use it, or are really now investigating how to use it. That's the number that changed. So I'm hoping, I mean, to me, again, AI is a tool, right? It's a more advanced tool. It's more complicated. Yes, there's definitely privacy issues, and you should make sure you know how the AI is using the data that you enter into it. And there are certain AIs that you can go with the pro model, which does keep things private and does not share it with anybody else. But that has to be an education for sure. But the idea is that realizing that there's just a lot of power that can become from it. And it is scary at some points, but the idea, again, if you are leaner, if you are having to let people go, one viable alternative is using an AI as a crutch or a mitigation to keep you moving forward as efficiently as possible and as lean as possible.
Yeah. I do want to acknowledge that that report also showed that those organizations that were moving into adoption tend to be larger organizations with bigger budget, more staff, and actual IT folk on staff. So I want to acknowledge that this has been presented as a great kind of democratizer of work. And what I am seeing and hearing anecdotally is that, to your point, like I saw this amazing tool that Dataro that sits on top of your Salesforce or Razor's Edge, and learns the data and starts being able to segment and predict, like, these people are ready to make a gift, these people should receive an ask about this. And I asked my team to look into it, and they were like, yeah, we looked into it, but the cost of it, we can't afford that, right? So yes, they're tools, and like I really do want to acknowledge that some of these tools are still not going to solve the problem.
Right.
One thing that is here and is worth considering is fractional talent and consultants. And so, as I said, I've been the development director, I've been the chief development officer, I've been the vice president of engagement, you name it. And I stepped out of being in-house about 3 years ago, in part to give me more flexibility and more power in decision making. And it also has allowed me to work with organizations that could never afford somebody with my level of experience and tenure. So I've had more control and more ability to work with smaller organizations who really just need to get started or need what's the plan for the year. And I've been able to put that together for them fairly quickly, where a new development person can take that and move forward. I've definitely worked at the United Way I was with. I brought in a really amazing external finance consultant, and we had multiple years of hiring finance folks out of corporate roles who are wonderful finance folks, I'm sure, but did not understand nonprofit finance and had led to some mistakes. And I don't want to point fingers at any one person. I have seen this at every organization that I have been an interim with, that there has been some level of finance misunderstanding between finance and fundraising that has led to really damaging issues. But bringing in someone as a consultant, a contractor, to help us straighten out those books and provide that leadership, who is really grounded in nonprofits, was a game changer, and in some ways an organization saver. So I think I've worked with teams who are really reluctant to have consultants, but I also think, like, if you can't afford to hire the level of expertise you need for in a full-time role, it might actually be better to bring in a consultant who has that level and get less of their time. Because, like a good technology, bringing in someone with a lot of experience who's been there before and knows what to do, they're going to be able to do more of it in less time because they're not learning on the job, they know the job. And so it's something worth considering. It's also a good idea when you're in a merger conversation, a closure conversation, right? That you're not hiring someone and bringing them in and promising them a job just to have it shut down. That it can be a little bit, give you some wiggle room to bring in an interim person, knowing, or if you're just, trying to downsize, right? Like bringing in an interim instead of, that gives you a chance to go from a VP to a director, or a director to a manager, right? So you have someone who's there to help you make the transition before you rehire it at what that new, more appropriate level is for the organization.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Fractional consultants are a great way forward as well, because you do get that expertise, a fraction of the cost, a fraction of their time, of course, as well. But they are a great way to keep you moving forward. It's another type of tool, I guess. Leaning into the superhero theme of the show, I was curious to know if you had a superpower to change something, to do something. I mean, there's a lot, of course, that can be done at this point. Like my just to my hope would be, again, as mentioned earlier, is the resilience, right? To have most nonprofits be able to come out of this resilient and stronger than ever before, right? I'm curious to know if you have a wish, a superpower, a magic wand to say, okay, this would be, if we can get here, or if this can happen, that would be amazing.
My wish, my magic wand, and I do have one. Here it is. I'm going to pull it out and wave it around.
Oh, you do? Look at that.
It is. It's got purple sparkles and stars in it. My wish is that philanthropy and the funders, the donors, that we build a bigger tent, right? That we all care deeply about our communities. We all care about livable cities, breathable oxygen, drinkable water, and children who are learning and happy and becoming that next generation of leaders. And my wish is that we use this moment once again to come together to build coalition. And I have had several conversations with pretty large funders and foundations recently, who are wringing their hands and are saying, well, what do we do? We're hearing from our funded partners that they're having to make these hard choices and we don't know what we can do about it, right? That there have been some calls saying that philanthropy should empty every dollar out of their endowments and pay for everything. And there has also been good research saying, yeah, that might close the gap for a year, but not for very long. And then we'd be back in the same place. So my wish is that could we come together and talk, let go of the power dynamics and really say, how do we build this sector better together? And how do we fund these mergers, closures? How do we fund the administrative costs that nobody wants to fund but are essential to keeping this work running? And how do we together build a vision of a stronger future, to counter kind of the dystopian one that everybody's talking about right now? So that's my wish, is that nonprofit folks, that community leaders, and that philanthropy leaders, that we can actually come together and have real, honest conversations that result in a coalition and a shared vision for a better tomorrow.
Here, here. Maya, this has been great. Lots of information. If people are interested in getting or hiring or looking into hiring a interim resource, how can they get in touch with you?
My website is sambar, SAMBARNPS.com. And I will also say there is a wonderful network of interim leaders that is the Interims Academy, that I am a graduate of, and that they help place interims across the country and have trained wonderful people all across the country. And so I highly recommend them as a resource. I can only work at so many orgs at once, but they have people who are probably in your community who are available.
We'll put those links in the show notes. Maya, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thank you. It's maddening sometimes, but I do it because I believe this is how we make a better world.
I agree. All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.